Knitting 2 socks at the same time is a good method for knitting socks, especially if you're the kind of person who gets second sock syndrome, where you knit through a pattern, you're really enjoying the pattern, enjoying the yarn, and then after you finish one sock, you kind of feel like you're done with it and you don't want to go on and do the same exact thing over again. So knitting them both at the same time keeps you from having second sock syndrome, and it also is a way of making sure that the sock cuff and the sock foot are the exact same length on both socks. So in this tutorial, we're using size 6 needles and worsted weight yarn, which is much heavier yarn and bigger needles than most socks patterns call for. And that's so that we can get through the techniques more quickly so that you can move on to other patterns and knit them using what you learned here. Now, if you want to follow along with the pattern that we're using here for these socks, it's available for purchase and download over on my website, or the techniques that we're using you can pretty much use for any cuff down sock pattern that you want to knit 2 socks at a time on 2 circulars. Again, these are the socks that we're knitting. They are kind of heavy socks. They're maybe not the greatest for putting in a pair of sneakers or something, but they are great for wearing around the house, kind of like slippers. And again, once you learn these techniques, you can go on to use normal size sock needles and normal size sock yarn. Now, when we're working 2 socks at a time, we're using 2 balls of yarn at the same time. And the first thing I want to show you is how to prep the yarn for that. Now, I'm just using this worsted weight yarn. It's a wool blend. It's available at almost any craft store or fabric store. And the first thing, I'll make a lesson out of this, is the yarn pulls from the inside on a skein like this. And when you look at the label, if the label is printed this way, it's always going to pull from the left side here. It's going to come out from there. If the label's printed up and down, it's going to pull from the top. So, drum roll please while I see if I can make this happen. Not too bad. Okay, so I found the end of my yarn. The next thing it's very handy to have is a kitchen scale, because I want to separate this yarn half and half. There's going to be leftover yarn, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but a kitchen scale will get you a lot closer than just eyeballing it well. So I'm turning the scale on, and this is supposed to be 85 grams of yarn, and it's 82. So I didn't get all the yarn I paid for, but it's only a couple of grams. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the ball winder to start winding this yarn to get half of it wound over here. And if you don't have a ball winder, that's fine. You can wind by hand. This just happens to be a lot faster. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the yarn, the big skein of yarn, on here and just keep winding until I get down to half the weight, which in this case is going to be 41 grams. We're getting close. You can see how much faster the ball winder works than winding it by hand. Okay. It says 39 now. I went too far. It's very close. Okay, there we go. So I can break the yarn at that point, confident that this is very close to exactly 1/2 of the yarn. And so is this. In the next video, we're going to cover the cast on. Now that you have your yarn wound into 2 equally sized balls, we're ready to do the cast on. Now I'm going to warn you, the cast on is kind of complicated, and I have it worked out here, I think, where I can clearly show you how to do it. But once you get past the cast on and the first couple of rows, it gets really easy. It's really easy to get into a groove with it and do it over and over again. Let's see what we got. We have our 2 circular needles. You'll see that I have this taped down because these kept curling up and I wasn't able to show you what I was doing. It won't be necessary for you to tape it down while you're doing it, but because you'll be able to keep track of it. I actually have to demonstrate. The first thing you do is you cast on all the stitches onto one needle and then transfer half those stitches onto the other needle. That's easy enough. I don't need to demonstrate that part for you. But then you want to arrange your needles where you have one in front and one in back. and the one in back is where the working yarn is coming from. Okay? Then follow those needles to the other end. Your working yarn is coming from not only the back needle, but the right side. Okay? You want to have it look just like this. So follow those needles around to the other end, and you want to cast on the number of stitches in your pattern. Your pattern tells you to, on the front needle, meaning the needle where the working yarn is not. And I have this blue cord here, that's the back needle, and this brown cord is the front needle. It doesn't really matter, just for demonstration purposes, I want you to realize that I've cast all of these stitches onto the front needle, here and here. Okay, now I want to transfer half of those stitches to the other needle, which is, in this case, the back needle. And I'm going to lose my tape there, which is okay. Now I should tell you while I'm doing this, when you transfer stitches, you always want to put your needle in as if to purl and slide it over. Okay? Okay. There. Let me go ahead and take this tape off before it messes us up. Of course, it's stuck to the yarn. Okay, I'll take this tape off. And I'm going to slide everything over to what I'm going to call like the starting position, where your working yarns, both working yarns are on the back needle, and we're getting everything geared up to work from the left hand to the right hand. So all the stitches are here in the left hand, and the working yarns are on the back needle. And this is a good spot to make sure that nothing's twisted. It's pretty easy to see if something's twisted. So I'm straightening everything out. Okay. Now, from this starting position, we're ready to knit. And things are still not tangled with my working yarns. That's nice. My working yarn's here. This is going to be the first stitch that I knit. When I do use this working yarn to knit this stitch, it's going to close up the cuff of the sock. So everything's scooted towards a tip, but I want to take this back needle and pull it out long, like that. Now these are the two needles I'm going to knit with. I'm going to put my needle in there and take the working yarn. Whoops, I actually need it to come from here. Okay. I'm going to wrap this needle and really tighten it up here before I pull it through. Now, if you look at this, normally when you pull a stitch through, you're not working from the cord. You're working from a stitch on the needle. Now, so you want to watch your tension on this. You can pull it too tightly because the cord isn't as big around as the needle. But on this first stitch, we do actually want to pull it pretty tightly. So in the pattern that we're using here, it's knit 2, purl 2 across this whole half of the sock. This is kind of slow going on this first part. But like I said, it does get easier. Okay, and the way that I have the stitches arranged, you will always end with a purl 2. Okay, we finished the first round, or the first half round of the first sock. We're moving on to the next sock now, which happens to be waiting here for us very conveniently. Scoot everything close to the tip of the needle and drop the working yarn from the first sock. We're done with that. Pick up the working yarn from the second sock. I've already made sure nothing is twisted. Put my needle in, pull that first stitch pretty tightly, and work K2, P2 across. You can see that there's a lot going on and flopping around right now, but just focus on the 2 needles that you're knitting with. Okay. I actually made a mistake here in my counting because I have an extra stitch. We're just going to ignore that. I just purled 2 together if you have an eagle eye. I would, if I was making these socks for real and not just demonstrating it, I would go back and fix that. But it's not a big deal right now while I'm showing you how to do it. Now, this appears to be kind of a tangled mess. I am going to straighten this out. This is something that annoys me to no end. It's having stuff really twisted around. So I spend the first few rows here straightening things out kind of a lot. Okay, here we are. Working yarn here and working yarn here. And you can see I've gotten everything down to 1 needle. I have an empty needle. So I'm going to use this empty needle in my right hand and knit off this other needle. I'll get everything into the starting position that we discussed in the last half round. Close to the tips of the needles with the working yarn on the back needle. Okay, there we go. So this is going to be the first stitch I knit with this as an empty needle. I always pull the back needle long, even though I'm not going to be using it this time, because I'm going to be using this empty needle, and pull that first stitch pretty tightly. And just work across and knit 2, purl 2 on this side. And when I'm done working this side, this half of both socks, I will have everything again on 2 needles, and I'll know it's the beginning of my round. There's one more thing I want to show you in starting the second sock. Okay, now I'm moving on to the second sock. And the one thing I want to be sure to tell you, this is pretty important, drop that working yarn from the first sock and pick up the working yarn from the second sock. This is a nice way of knitting socks, but you don't want to knit them together. You will have to rip it out. You'll have no choice but to rip it out if you end up knitting them together. And then just work across the second sock as you did for the first. And the next row will be just like the first row, except for everything is joined this time. And that's it. You want to follow the pattern for the length of cuff that you need to knit. And in this pattern, I have you knitting 3 rounds plain before we start with the heel flap, which is what we'll cover in the next video. Now you should be ready to start the heel flap. What you have are 2 finished cuffs, exactly the same length because they were knit at the same time. And then in the pattern that we're using here, I have you knit 3 rounds plain with no ribbing before we start on the heel flap. Now the heel flap is this back part of the sock right here. I always say the human foot is a very weird thing to knit clothing for. This is where it becomes obvious. The heel flap is this back section here. We're going to knit this independently of the rest of the sock and get back to it. But let's first start with this thing. Okay, take a look at my work here. And you'll see that I have yarn wound on bobbins. This isn't important for you. You'll have your yarn in the balls that you're using, but because I had so many samples to knit up, I just wound some of this onto these bobbins so I could use the other balls of yarn to knit more samples. So here are our cuffs, and you should have some pretty good practice now knitting with 2 circular needles. We're going to get everything up into the starting position like this. And for the heel flap, we're going to knit across this half of the socks only, back and forth. Everything on the back needle is just going to hang there until we get back to it. So I'm going to pull the back needle long and get my working yarn. I didn't mean for that to go flying. Get my working yarn to position. And to knit the heel flap, the first thing we do is slip this stitch. Now to slip a stitch, you put your needle in as if to purl and slide it over to the other needle. And then the pattern is slip, knit, all the way across. Yep. I need to release more yarn on my bobbin here. I ended with a knit stitch, and I can tell I did because my working yarn is coming from the last stitch there. So I'll slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, and knit. Now, of course, I drop that working yarn, I move on to the second sock, and I'm going to do the same series of stitches across here. Slip, knit, now you've had a lot of good practice, of course, in working in the round with these two circulars, but this is where things are going to change. Instead of turning your work and going on to the next needle, the other half of the stitches, we're going to just work the wrong side of these stitches here. So we're essentially going to work on what is now the back needle since we've turned the work. And in this pattern, I have you slipping the first stitch and then purling across all of the other stitches. This is so loud with this table with the paper over it. For shooting video, the needles make a lot of noise on this table. Okay, that gives you the idea. You're going to finish working across these stitches and then working on the wrong side, doing the same thing, slipping the first stitch and purling across all those. And then you'll turn the work and again, only work across these front stitches and then only work across them from the back on the other side. So you'll continue to work the first half of the stitches on both socks, following your pattern for as many rows as it tells you to. I recommend using a row counter or keeping tally marks because it is kind of difficult to count those rows when you're done. Next up, we're going to learn how to turn the heel. Now that you've finished the heel flap, we're going to do what is called turning the heel. And that is this little part of the sock right here. There isn't really very much to it, but it's kind of an interesting piece of knitting in that we're going to use what are called short rows. And I'm going to demonstrate that for you right now. Here's your knitting as it is right now, and the heel flaps are finished. These instep stitches are hanging out, waiting to be worked. You're ready to work a wrong side row on these heel flaps. So the instructions tell you to purl 12, then purl 2 together, purl 1 more, and then turn the work. Now, before I go any further, I want to tell you that we've been working all the way across and then all the way back. For the short rows, we actually have to work each heel individually. We're going to pretty much finish this one and then go over here. We're going to finish this side, -1 row, and then move on to the next one. But this is all clearly spelled out in the pattern. I just want to make sure you get the technique. So I'm going to turn the work, meaning I have the right side of the work facing me again. I slip the first stitch. You always put your needle in, do that again, as if to purl and slide it over. Knit 5, knit 2 together, and knit 1, and then turn the work. And you're going to continue following the instructions. you turn the work, you can see you still have stitches over here. We turned before we reached the end of the row, which is why we have to finish each one of these heels individually. Now on the last row of this one, you will reach the end of the row and you'll jump over here and do the same thing to the second sock. So you definitely want to follow your pattern for this part because turning the heel, the rows are all numbered and you want to keep track of where you are because it's very difficult to go back and count if you lose place of where you are. And I have you working the first 7 rows, I believe, on the first sock. You jump over to the second sock and work 8 rows, and then you eventually go back to the first sock and knit that 8th row on the first sock. Don't get confused by this. Just follow the pattern and it will lead you through it. I just wanted to make sure that you understood how the short rows work and how we turn the work before we've reached the end of the row. Okay, next up is probably the most complicated part of the socks, but it's very interesting, I think. It's picking up the heels for the gusset. Now you should be ready to pick up stitches for the gusset. I'm going to carefully show you the part of the sock I'm talking about because I don't want to lift my hands because I'm holding this work down. I'm going to have to lift my hands. The gusset is what we're going to pick up along the sides of the heel flap here like this, and it's what gets us started the right direction so that we can knit the foot of the sock. Okay, nothing moved here. Let's go ahead and take a look here. Your work should look like this. You have one needle running all the way through like this, and the second needle is just here running through these heel flap stitches. Now where we're going to start, I should mention, let me go ahead and mention this, my pattern that we're using here is a little bit different than most other patterns that you'll see for socks on 2 circulars. If you're really paying attention, you'll notice that we have one extra row of knitting on one side of each sock. Now doing that makes the pattern much, much more simple to follow, and it won't make a bit of difference when the sock is actually finished. You will not notice one little tiny row from one side of the sock to the other, I promise. But it does make it really different. And if you're using a different pattern and not the one we're using here, you might notice that there's that it's not going to follow, this pattern isn't going to follow the one you're using right here, even if it has up to this point. Okay, back to the work here. We're going to pick up these stitches along this side of the heel flap. We just finished turning this heel, and we have the right side of the work facing us, and we're going to pick up these stitches using this yarn and the same needle that we've been working with. And to do that, we roll the side of the heel flap so that we see the very edgemost stitches, and you'll see that they're a series of V's. You want to put your needle in. Usually I skip the first one, I go into the second one. Put your needle into that V and wrap it and pull it through. That's one. Into the next one, wrap it and pull it through. Into the third one, we're putting it into both legs of the V. And in this pattern, I'm having you pick up 11, which is usually about right for getting us right down to the bottom of this. I wasn't counting, but that's okay. There we go. Now things are starting to look pretty funny. We're going to pull our cord and use this same needle actually we need to work, if you're following my pattern, we need to work 8 on these heel flap stitches before we go any further. Row 8, I mean, which happens to be slip 1, knit 10, knit 2 together. Now we have the correct number of heel stitches. We just finished up that one. Now I am going to flip my work and take a new needle. Let me double check this. Nope, I'm going to take the same needle and I'm going to pick up the same 11 stitches on this side of the sock with the right side facing. Let me show you again. This is where I stopped working the short row heels. Then I picked up those stitches, I finished the short row heel here, and I'm going to pick up these stitches on this side. I'm running out of working yarn. Okay. There, now things look very weird. That's, if I can even twist this around for you to see. I'm going to turn the work because I want to work across the instep stitches for the first time in a long time. There we go. Now I see what it's doing. Okay. You have heel stitches picked up on one side of each sock. Take your needle and we're going to work across these stitches we haven't worked on. Just knit across 20 and 20, and then you'll pick up the stitches for this heel flap. You're going to knit across all these and pick up the stitches for this heel flap. Let me get you started on that. We're not working ribbing anymore because this is the top of the sock now, the foot of the sock. Okay, and this part isn't hard to understand because it's very much like how we worked the heel flap or the cup of the sock before. Move on to the second instep here. Put your needle in and drop that working yarn. That could be my new motto, drop that working yarn. When we're done with this, we'll have everything back on 2 needles again. I guess I could lift my hands off the table a little bit. Okay. Now we're in a position I can show you. Everything's back on 2 needles. You'll turn your work. And you're going to use, we're kind of in the normal starting position here, even though we have this big gap of stitches here. You pull the back needle long, and you want to pick up 11 stitches all the way up to here. You know, I've been picking up these stitches and I'm thinking, and I have not been counting. Normally, I do count. Now, this part does get kind of difficult to work because, I mean, not difficult really, but it's tight because we have a lot of stitches, and as we decrease, it's going to get easier. You're just going to work across what was the back of the heel stitches here. And then down the side of the first 11 stitches we picked up for the side of the heel. Okay, and then, whoops. And then using that same needle, we switch over to the next sock, and we finally pick up the last 11 stitches. Whoops, I split a stitch there. Okay, well, you don't have to watch me do this. I think you have the idea now about picking up the stitches. Once you pick up the 11, you'll knit around to the end and you'll have half of the stitches on one side, or you'll have all of the heel and gusset stitches on one side and your instep stitches on the other needle. And then once you get to that point, we're going to be ready to decrease for the gusset stitches, and that will get us back down to the original number of stitches we had when we started the cuff, and that's what we'll cover in the next video. The most difficult part of knitting these socks is behind you now. Now is when the socks on 2 circulars is really going to start to move quickly. Because as working with DPNs, you're always readjusting things, working with 3 or 4 DPNs. But with socks on circulars, everything is cut in half, and you're only readjusting after 2 sides of half the socks on 2 sides. It does go more quickly, if that made sense. So let's take a look at where we are now. We're ready to decrease for the gusset. And I've already worked the first bit of this pattern, or this section, in that I've used my empty needle and I've knit across the instep stitches. And so I have these 2 very funny shapes. We're going to decrease in 4 different spots, which are all on the back needle right now. Here, 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 and here. And we do that every other row. Let me show you how this goes. I'm going to get myself into the starting position with these needles. And this one's pulled long. And the pattern tells us on this first sock, and it's identical across both socks. So we knit 1, SSK, which is slip, slip, knit. It's a decrease. We knit across everything else. Until we get to the last 3 stitches of this sock. Okay, we've got to almost be there. Okay, the last 3 stitches, we knit 2 together, knit 1. The reason we're using SSKs and knit 2 togethers is because these are mirror image decreases, yes. And it will make the 2 halves of the sock match each other. Okay, so we worked across that first sock. We're going to do the exact same thing over here, where we will start off with knit 1 SSK, work all the way around to the last 3 stitches, knit 2 together, knit 1, and then we knit across. Well, that's the end of our row. The second row is just a plain knit all stitches around until we get back to the beginning of the round. And then the third round is another decrease round where we will knit plain across the instep stitches, knit 1 SSK, knit all the way around to the last 3 stitches on the first sock, knit 2 together, knit 1, jump over to the second sock, knit 1 SSK, knit all the way around to the last 3 stitches on the second sock, knit 2 together, knit 1. So you'll follow your pattern, but every other row is a decrease row. Every other row is also a knit round. That makes sense? Yes. And then you're going to knit the foot plain without decreasing. Once you get back down to the original number of stitches you started with, you'll knit the foot plain for as long as you need the foot to be for whoever you're knitting the sock for. And then you'll want to do the toe decreases. You want to shape the toe of the sock. It's all in the pattern, but it is just like the gusset decreases, except for you're going to start decreasing on the instep side as well. And then next up, we're going to graft the toe together using the Kitchener stitch. Your socks should be just about finished now. We only have the toes opened. We need to graft the toes together using something called the Kitchener stitch, which is a seamless graft, and you won't feel any kind of seam or anything on your toes when you wear the socks. Now before I show you, I want to show you this. When we shoot videos, I make up things I call piece outs. The sock finished at different stages throughout the pattern so that I can demonstrate things. I've never had so many piece outs for a pattern before because this is 2 socks at a time. Look at this pile of knitting that we've plowed through in these videos. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting because I always have a pile of something, but I've never had a mountain before. Okay, let's get to the socks. We just have very few stitches on each sock. I've broken both working yarns, leaving myself about an 18-inch tail. And going into the starting position, my working yarn's in back, of course. I'm going to thread this yarn onto a tapestry needle, a blunt end yarn needle. Okay, starting with the first stitch on the front needle, I'm going to put my tapestry needle in as if to knit, pull that through and take that stitch off, then go into the next stitch on the front needle as if to purl and leave that stitch on. Then I'm going to go into the back needle first stitch as if to purl, pull that through and take it off, and then into the next stitch as if to knit and leave it on. And then I usually pull it tight. So it's a 4-stitch repeat. Let me show you again. Knit, off, purl, purl, off, knit. And then I always give it a little tighten after that. Knit, off, purl, purl, off, knit. You'll continue this all the way across all of these stitches, and when you're done, you'll just pull the working yarn through the last loop, tighten it up, and then you'll want to weave in the ends. And then of course you'll just go over to the second sock and finish that up, and then you will have a finished pair of socks. You know, it's funny because usually when I teach people to make mittens or gloves or socks or something, the last thing I always say in the video is, go make another one. But you're done. You finished a whole pair of socks. And you won't get second sock syndrome since you've already finished everything. Good luck.